I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and even though I'm a little late in getting to it, I still thought I'd share my thoughts on the short film Godzilla vs. Gigan Rex, which premiered on Godzilla Day, and so far is the only one of the 2 rematches between Godzilla and Gigan that Toho has decided can remain on YouTube. The other one, the live-action one, they took down pretty quickly, but Gigan Rex is still up, and that's the one that most people are talking about because it's really good. I still remember quite a while ago seeing the initial fan trailer concept, because that's how this started, a fan animation of this rematch between Godzilla and Gigan, introducing this new variant. And somewhat surprisingly, this was one of those rare instances where the studio saw the fan-made thing, and instead of bringing down the hammer and saying, no, these are our toys and you can't play with them, they instead told the guy, how about you finish it for us? And he did. Though technically, a lot of people have said that the Godzilla who appears in this animation made his debut as Snow Godzilla in the Shinkalian crossover movie. You know, Shinkalian's this anime that involves trains that transform into robots, and it's also crossed over with Hatsune Miku and Neon Genesis Evangelion. Too much to get into right now, but the Snow Godzilla design seems to resemble this Godzilla, just caked in snow. But anyway, whether or not that's the same model, it's definitely debuted in this one. It's now so official, in fact, that there are Bandai vinyl figures of both this Godzilla and Gigan Rex. You can't get more official than that. Being animated, it actually looks really good. It is just this side of being photorealistic. The texturing and stuff is very, very good, but when you look at it, you can still tell it's animated. Though I gotta say, looks better than a lot of what modern Hollywood movies have been putting out recently in terms of their CGI, because I assume this thing wasn't rushed the same way. But it's not just the look of the thing, it's not just the texturing, it's also the cinematography. Like the way the camera moves around and frames its subjects, and the way in which the creatures, for all intents and purposes, strike a pose when the time is right. This, well, I would say this is the best Godzilla anime we've gotten up to this point. The fights actually feel reminiscent of anime fights, almost more so than kaiju fights in certain places. It's still obviously a kaiju fight, of course, but seeing Godzilla, the Gigan army, and Gigan Rex in certain times, like they move quickly. There's that one shot where Gigan Rex is floating at the end, and it looks like something right out of Dragon Ball or any kind of shonen anime. It makes me wonder why the actual Godzilla anime works haven't done something like this, because I think that would certainly be to their benefit. But, you know, this is technically a fan animation when you get right down to it, even if it is officially sanctioned. But it's not just the animation and the cinematography, it's also the characterization that really makes it work. The way in which the Gigan army is portrayed is actually really interesting considering there are so many of them. I know I haven't really said it that much, and usually when other people ask me what my favorite kaiju is other than Godzilla, my go-to is Rodan because I like Rodan. He is my second favorite. But I'm also a huge fan of Gigan. I just think he's interesting among all the other space monsters. And seeing the updated version here, It feels like a natural update. The design is altered somewhat, but it's still recognizable as Gigan. The only thing I would have done differently is I would have had his beak jut out a bit more. This particular Gigan looks like it's taking design cues from Red King, and I don't know, it just doesn't look as good to me. Maybe it was easier to animate that, but personally, I would have had his mouth stick out just a little bit more to make him look a bit less pinheaded. But watching them go about the destruction of the city and acting as a unit, it really works. You can see there's a methodology to the way they do things, but also a sort of sadistic cruelty to it. Like the way in which that one Gigan pierces the tanks and then sort of stacks them up like a shish kebab on his spike and then lifts it up to observe his handiwork. I mean, that shows you that to a certain extent he's enjoying this. And then, of course, Gigan Rex enters. And the best way I would describe Gigan Rex is that he is a monster full of surprises. The first time you watch the short especially, you're never quite sure what Gigan Rex is going to do. And even though his armaments are all familiar things to Gigan, in a way, they're all remixed so that you don't expect them to appear the way they do. Instead of having the giant hammer hooks for hands, his hands can turn into these chainsaw whips. His laser is in his stomach, coming from a curiously shaped orifice. He has that scissor thing in his tail, which he doesn't really use to attack, but it's still a surprise when it happens. Also, the fact that classical music starts when he appears. That actually implies he might be more intelligent than the other Gigans. Like, he even sort of demonstrates that. There are moments throughout where you can tell he is thinking. Like, when he first shows up, he leads with the attack of the chainsaw whips. When Godzilla deflects them both, he retracts them, and he immediately moves on to an attack that will be more effective. He sees, okay, that didn't work, now we're going to try this. So he's strategizing on the fly. That's a good bit of characterization. As for Godzilla, first of all, I gotta say the design really works. It is its own distinct design, but it's still recognizable as Godzilla. It's not like what happened on Godzilla the Ride, where it felt like they just took the Heisei design and tweaked it a little, or from the Polygon trilogy, where it felt like they just took the Legendary design and tweaked that a little. This is a new Godzilla design, and it looks good. I'm not entirely sold on him having 5 fingers instead of 4. I feel like that's just a distinct part of the design overall. But it's not like something I'm going to harp on the way certain people have harped on gills when it came to either the MonsterVerse or Shin Godzilla. And in terms of personality, well, I guess that partly depends on whether or not you accept what a lot of fans seem to be accepting, that this is actually Godzilla Jr. from the Heisei series, having absorbed his father's radiation after Godzilla vs. Destroya and grown up. All the evidence seems to suggest that this is the case. The narration is by Megumi Odaka, who was Miki Sagusa in that series. The narration also says it's been roughly a quarter of a century since Godzilla disappeared. And if you do the math, that checks out. It has been 27 years technically, but still in that quarter of a century range since the end of Godzilla vs. Destroya, which was technically set in 1996 rather than 1995, so in universe it would be 26 years, which is even closer to the actual timeline. Then, of course, you have the visual cues of how the first shot we get of Godzilla, as well as the last, was a backlit shot of him in silhouette, moving very similarly to how the grown-up Godzilla Jr. is moving at the end of that movie. All the evidence seems to suggest that it is Godzilla Jr. in adulthood. And I think that does work. It finally gives him a chance to have his own adventure and go up against an opponent who, canonically, is the first enemy who ever made Godzilla bleed. So That's fitting. This gives him a chance to really prove himself, and prove himself to be one heck of a powerhouse, because he goes white hot at the end. Plus, it makes sense this would be Junior because he showed up to defend. And it feels kind of like if Junior did show up because he was a little friendlier towards humans, and he also was exposed to a Godzilla who wasn't necessarily a hero, but also wasn't an aggressive destroyer either, you would think he would be more of a defender type of Godzilla. Although, of course, he wouldn't necessarily go out of his way to stop the city from being destroyed, as we saw. So, yeah, I'm leaning towards that being the headcanon as well. And there, again, are so many little bits of characterization where you can see him thinking things out. You can tell that he is observing his surroundings. He is showing up specifically because he is there to put an end to this fight, which kind of harkens back to the later Showa Godzilla. I'm talking like Terror of Mechagodzilla kind of portrayal. In the end, even though this is technically still a fan animation, the fact that it is officially sanctioned by Toho does have me wondering if maybe, just maybe, things are changing there. Maybe they are leaning more towards the idea of letting Godzilla be a character again. I mean, I can certainly hope, but then again, I haven't really seen any official evidence to the contrary, and this was a fan animation that was only completed and sanctioned because it was part of an online streaming event. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to reflect plans for the movies. We will see, though. I mean, the response has been overwhelmingly positive to this thing, so maybe Toho's listening to that, maybe they're not. But either way, the fact that it exists at all, and the fact that it's still up and wasn't taken down almost immediately like the other shorts that have been uploaded on previous G-Fests, I think that says something. But anyway, I think it was cool. It was neat to see Gigan return as well as get a new variation. It actually took me back to like the early days of the internet when I don't even know if the websites that originated this are still around, but I remember distinctly there was a subgroup of the Godzilla fandom that was making an entire catalog, I guess you could call it, of Gigan variants. Like, it started with introducing a female version, Gigani, that was like Gigan's mate, and then they started introducing other versions that were their own distinct designs and had their own distinct powers and whatnot, and even different personalities. It was pretty extensive from what I remember. I don't know whatever became of that, and I have no idea if that was any sort of influence on this short. But it did kind of remind me of that. So there was even a little bit of a nostalgia factor there for me. But even putting that aside, it was still very well made, and I'm glad to see that it was officially sanctioned. Well, we'll see what happens the next time we get actual footage of something that Toho is doing movie-wise, but for now, I say we enjoy this while they leave it up. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.